Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the joint meeting between the Union County Board of Education and the Union County Board of County Commissioners. It is Thursday, March 18th, and I would like to call this meeting to order and begin with approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and now we can welcome our county commissioners, our county manager, and all of your staff. And if there are any introductions over on your side.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Union County Board of Commissioners. Call it to order. And I'd like to also introduce some of our staff here. Of course, Mark Watson, our manager. Our commissioners you're familiar with. We've got Michelle Lancaster, our deputy county manager, Blake Hart, Richard Long, and Lynn West in the room here. In the adjoining room, we've got Patrick Nyland, Beverly Lyles, Catherine Brown, and Liz Cooper.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We're happy to have all of you here with us tonight. So that brings us to the financial overview, and we'll begin with the Union County Public Schools fiscal year 2021 CARES Act funding update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll get this conversation going. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Professional Development Center. I want to start off this evening by, first of all, thanking Union County government, the Board of County Commissioners, especially Mark Watson and Michelle Lancaster, who have been instrumental in supporting Union County Public Schools this year. As you all know, trying to open schools in a pandemic has been a challenge. I'm very proud of our school system and the partnership between the county and the school system. The county has done a tremendous amount of work to help with things like acquiring PPE, the vaccination clinic that we just held in collaboration with you all in the Department of Health was a tremendous accomplishment. We all look forward to tomorrow and Saturday having round 2 for that for our employees. So I just wanted to say thank you from our team, Mark, to you and your team, and to the Board of County Commissioners for your support, as well as for supporting our nurses in your recent vote with regards to additional compensation. Thank you very much. Madam Chair, numbers 2 through 4 on the agenda are going to be presented this evening by Ms. McLam and I. I've got Shauna McLam at the podium. She is our Chief Financial Officer. We've prepared a presentation for you this evening. So if it pleases the board, we're going to go ahead and move forward. Here are the 5 items we're going to kind of go through, including operational outlooks as well as state and capital outlooks. I want first Ms. McLam to start by giving both boards a COVID relief funding update. As you all are aware, we have received significant amount of funds from the federal government with regards to funding relief as it pertains to COVID-19. So Ms. McLam, if you want to take it from here, and I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. In your packets tonight, I did include a more detailed overview. It's about 5 pages. I have provided this detailed memo to our board several times as we've added additional funding from the state and at the federal level for COVID relief. I will go through a few of these. There are several different categories of COVID funding. Each layer we've gotten and each release we have has had a little different guidelines, a little different spending deadlines. So I'll go through a few of these at a high level. The first line you see was the original initial COVID relief that we received. The bulk of these funds were used to help support our school nutrition program during the closures between March and June. They continued to provide food and did feeding. We didn't get approval to do our community feeding program until much later on into the pandemic. So we were supporting our school nutrition program as well as additional remote instructional items for our students. As you can see, a lot of these categories are very self-explanatory. A few of the things that I do want to point out under the school health support, we did do a contract for 11 additional nurses in our schools. So now we have coverage for all 53 schools have a full-time nurse. We did some of the non-digital supplies, as I mentioned, were some paper copies of different activities and instructional needs for our students. School nutrition, again, student computers and devices. We provided 1,200 or purchased 1,200 Chromebooks, 1,490 iPads for K-2 students, as well as 439 staff devices, which covers the student computer devices and personnel devices. We also did additional connectivity for any of our students who had issues with working remotely if they didn't have internet. We purchased 750 hotspots, as well as purchased additional Wi-Fi for our buses, and did some connectivity with some of our mobile units. So when they are in school, they have the best connectivity for remote learning. Additionally, we did purchase PPE supplies, sanitizer, and custodial needs. I will say that you all have been a great partner with the health department in providing a lot of the PPE needs that we had and helping us procure a lot of our items. The next round of funding we received, the emergency relief at the top was the first, what they're calling ESSER 1 funds. The federal guidelines require that we apply for all the funding you see on this page has an application process. We apply to DPI. There's an application we complete that with details of how these dollars are to be spent. Unfortunately, some of these also have just very limited criteria for eligible expenses. Many of them have single line items. As you see for digital curricula, you can purchase specifically that. There's not much variance or flexibility in those dollars. Student health support, as well as the supplemental instruction services that we've just issued out to our schools to help address learning loss. The next round, which I know we've had some questions about, is considered ESSER 2. We are in the planning stages of these funds right now. The state has issued a planning allotment for us of $17 million. Monday, the state board was presented the application for this funding, and the application window will not open until April the 1st. A lot of the things that will be addressed with these funds, one of the things that is being discussed is our summer learning program. There'll be a 6-week summer learning program to address learning loss, and we're estimating it's going to take about half of these funds to be able to support that 6-week program. Right now, there is no state funding to help support that, so if it is something that is mandated for us to do, these would be the funds we would utilize for that purpose. I do want to point out that none of these funds have the eligibility to supplant any local dollars. So all of these items that I've gone through, many of them, as you can see, there's no way we would have been able to plan for those in our budget, so there would be no local funding that we would use in lieu of for these federal dollars. Does anybody have any questions about any of that? As I mentioned, there's more detailed documentation in there, and I did also include a full state allocation with some highlights of the big 12 districts in the state and the funding that they received from this funding allotment, just to give you some perspective when it comes to how much money we received in comparison to other districts.
I have a question. In reviewing the guidelines for the existing as well as the SR2, do you anticipate there being any funding for a special one-time bonus for any of our staff or educators? Does that appear to be part of any of the options for use of this funding?
At this point, up until this point, that has not been an option. There hasn't been an eligible account for us to use for something of that purpose. I know there was a question in the state board meeting about that specifically, but we've not gotten any communication that would indicate. I haven't seen any actual application or account codes listing or detailed criteria of what would be eligible. So I'm going to hold confirmation until I get some of that information.
The other day, DPI was asked by a state board member if we could use any of those funds for bonuses to employees. DPI answered yes, but we don't have it in writing anywhere yet.
We haven't had at the state level for LEAs an update on this funding, as we just have, like I say, we're still in the planning phases, and the allotment that they have issued for planning could change slightly.
Thank you. Are any of these funds going to be used to hire additional employees or create a situation that would be an ongoing need that would necessitate us raising the budget for following years or letting those people go?
No, the majority of the funds that are related to any type of staffing that we've done, the state has limited your ability to contracting services. So we've contracted nurses. We're looking into contracting some other categories of employees so that once the funding is gone, then that staffing, it's not a recurring expense.
We've been very careful and cognizant of that and not doing anything that would be recurring.
How many clusters is this summer school going to be offered at?
We haven't really addressed any of the details at this point. I don't know if Dr. Houlihan wants to speak to that.
We plan to take an agenda item to the next curriculum committee meeting. I believe we have not been given any kind of guidance from the state on how to plan for that, so we really don't know at this point in time.
I have a question also. It's kind of a follow-up to Mr. Rushing's question. Any equipment we buy, is there any future expenditures related to that as far as warranty, service, replacement, or anything that we need to be aware of?
Any of the technology that we purchase, such as laptops or Chromebooks, we do purchase warranties with those. So we have the same coverage we do with any of our other devices. The one thing that is has been purchased were the hotspots. The state was very specific that we could not continue. They would not fund additional services past June 30th of this year.
Okay.
Is the summer learning going to be virtual or in school?
We plan for it to be in school. If there is a requirement in legislation that requires virtual, that we have to make that an option, we will. And of course, any student that has a medical issue or some reason why they can't physically come into the building, we will certainly meet that need if we can. But I think the first intent is an in-person, face-to-face summer school program.
Shauna, do you know if, in addition to this $17 million, is there any additional funding coming through the new stimulus package directly to the school system?
Right now, we've not seen any planning for that. We've had some, I've heard some discussion about this could be upwards of what are ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 combined, but I have not seen any planning on that. It does take some time for a lot of this funding to be distributed to the districts because it does go through the state board. There's an application process. So at this point, it does take a lot longer for us to get the money allocated to, from the time that it's approved to the time we get the allocation. So.
You mentioned twice about the application process.
Yes.
It's not as if they're not going to give the funds. So what is it that they're wanting to see in the application?
In the applications, we have to detail the instructional goals, measurements that we plan to determine if how the funding was spent. Did we meet the instructional goal? We will have multiple layers of audit of these funds. There is an office that was created in Raleigh called NC Pro, and that their whole purpose is the pandemic relief office. We have scheduled audits that will take place probably from our regular auditors, from DPI, from NC Pro. These funds will be audited quite extensively. So we have to keep very detailed records. We have to have anytime we make a purchase, we have to document everything that we've done just to ensure that, they want to see that we're spending the funds appropriately.
Thank you.
Shauna, I want to thank you for this document here so that we can see all 115 school districts across North Carolina. And is there any explanation when you look at this? There's a lot of school districts significantly smaller than Union County Public Schools. Is there any, and they're getting a lot more funding and they're so much smaller. Is there any explanation you can offer why Union County Public Schools, how they arrived at, the 17 million, when you're looking at other school districts?
All the COVID relief dollars have been allocated using Title I funding formulas. Title I uses poverty and demographics in your county to make those allocations. So we are really one of the least poverty counties as a whole. Okay. So that really has a an impact on the amount of funding that we receive. So while we're trying to support our 40,000, 42,000 students, we're really getting allocated based on the number of, on a formula based on our Title I population.
Yeah, I find that so interesting because the Title I schools are not the only ones that have suffered with learning loss.
I think they tried to do that probably just for some consistency.
Mhm.
They didn't have any other tools, so I believe that's probably how we're going to have to deal with, what we'll deal with moving forward.
Is that mandated by the federal government or by the state?
I think that was at the federal level. I think for consistency across the country, they decided to use that as their guide for formulating how to issue these funds from the very beginning.
And submitting that application, taking a lead from the chair, could we put in that application that, hey, you're giving us these funds based on this. However, within our county, we have XYZ type of needs, just as a making them aware type situation.
The application process is more of an accountability measure, like I said, to distinguish what measures you're using, what instructional goals you're going to be meeting with the funds, as opposed to applying for additional money that justifying why you might need more. Is that what you're asking?
Right. So if that's not a good segue,
Yeah.
then maybe we can come up with just a blanket, letter to whomever saying you're grading us here, as the chair is talking about, but within our county, we have needs truly for Title I. Can we get that word to somebody? Because that was a question that a citizen asked me, and I did some research on it and found out how that allocation was made. So now I'm at the point where maybe our finance team can say, we appreciate what you're doing for us, and we know how you're grading us. I'm using grading as a formula, but within our county, we have said needs that need to be addressed, and the fundings that we receive, by the time we divvy it up, those areas that need additional funding to even be on par, if you want to say, are left out.
Well, the state does have the ability to hold back some of the initial dollars off the top. And what they have done with some categories is they have allocated on an application basis for supplemental on top of for specific things. So if the county is eligible to apply for those additional funds, we will definitely, as they are released, make those applications to attempt to do what you're asking and bring in more dollars to address very specific needs in our schools.
Appreciate that.
Jimmy, in conversations with our legislators recently, they
Yes.
are looking at the need for counties like Union County that really has two tiers.
Mhm.
So, next time you speak to one of them, remind them that they are looking at it.
Yeah, that was my source.
Yeah.
I was, when the citizen asked the question, Benji gonna find an answer, but I'm thinking from us, we're at ground zero. What is it that we can do from ground zero to knock on somebody's door that says, hey, we know we ride deep, but we got some areas that ain't riding deep.
That's true.
Thank you, Shauna.
One more question.
Okay.
How does this affect charter schools? Do they get part of this, or do they get their own?
My understanding is a charter school would be eligible if they take Title I dollars. There was some discussion at the very beginning about some of the private schools and equitable services. So there is a process that we go through during the application process of soliciting for equitable services on federal dollars. They've removed that requirement from the after the first one. They removed that from the legislation, so they were funded some way separately at private schools. So as long as they receive Title I dollars, it's my understanding that they are also eligible to receive a portion of these funds.
So this is all for Union County Public Schools. It's not for, you don't have to share it with anybody.
Right. We don't have to provide it. We don't have to solicit about equitable services at this point. So next on the agenda was the property sales and acquisitions. I know there was some question about a few of the recent activity. Cox Road property, we currently have had no recent activity. And on Forest Hills and Indian Trail, there has been, you all approved those purchases on November 16th of 2020. I don't know if you have some specific questions about that we could answer.
Has that been purchased?
Yes, we purchased both properties. We
Both
bought the
properties have
Forest
been
Hills
purchased?
property and the Indian Trail property.
Okay.
Yep, we both have. I think it was either late in November or early in December that I think early December that we closed on them.
So we're going to move on to our state budget outlook.
One question.
Oh.
Has there been any, no, there's not even been a question or any interest on Cox Road?
There have been a couple of inquiries, but every time we've done an appraisal, they did not want to offer what the appraised value was, and so they walked away.
So you've done a recent appraisal, right?
Oh, goodness. No, this was a year or so ago when someone approached us.
Right.
We don't do an appraisal unless someone's interested in purchasing it.
Okay.
And what they wanted to pay was not equivalent to the value of the property. So it did not go through. But we've had, I would say over the last 4 years, we've had 2 inquiries.
Mr. Manager, would that property also be a part of our revaluation and we could get an idea from that? I know we wouldn't tax it, but
I'm sure it was part of the revaluation process.
Maybe
I'm
we
sure
can share
there's been
that.
an updated value, a tax value set on it.
definitely share that with the school board.
They, being the current owner of the property, they would have received notice of that revaluation or that revalued number.
Okay, thank you.
So we're going to move on to the state budget outlook.
So recently, the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction did release their budget priorities for the next budget cycle. The new state superintendent has also issued her priorities as well. You can see in here, several of these items do directly relate to the pandemic, but there are also some key priorities with regards to workforce development, professional development, school safety. And we have a massive statewide school business software modernization project going on. Union County Public Schools is one of the top school systems in the state to be leading that effort, where we're transferring over from one platform, financial and HR platform, to another one. And there is a request to add additional funding in that pot of money for school systems to expand that modernization process. Other than that, this is all we pretty much know at the current time with the state budget. As a reminder, we have not had a state budget, a new state budget, since the 2018-19 school year. So we are on a 2-year budget cycle. That has a significant impact on local school districts because, your local, your state, and your federal all work hand in hand together. And the fact that you have the rising cost, different needs, 2 years after a state budget that was put out with at the time reflected the needs at that time, we have serious concerns about wanting to get a new state budget passed this year during the long session in order to catch the state and Union County Public Schools up to where we actually are right now. We have not received any planning allotments. We also have some concern about the potential funding loss due to ADM. There's a lot of conversation at the state level right now about hold harmless provisions. And what I mean by that is at the end of last year, before the school year started, the state indicated that we were going to have a hold harmless provision with the number of staff members and allotments that were provided to us because of economic uncertainty. We are certainly advocating for that to continue so that if we were to lose students and not gain students back in enrollment, we would not have to face the seriousness of losing staff because of the loss of state dollars. So we're still waiting to see if the state will continue to provide that hold harmless provision, which would be wonderful. The second half of this slide kind of tells you what our finance staff is leaning towards in terms of planning. This is all estimated right now. We have not received any numbers, percentages. These are based on historical trends that the state has used with regards to step increases and increases for salary for state employees, as well as an 8% average benefit increase. And before we move to the local budget, we're happy to answer any questions about state funding.
Dr. Houlihan, how has the mandated implementation of class size requirements impacted the schools that need for funding, and what is that? Is that's part of, I guess, what has not been addressed in the state budget?
That is correct. So during the last 3 to 4 years, there's been new legislation with regards to kindergarten through third grade class sizes. They have continued that implementation this year, and I believe next year will be the full implementation of that law. What that means is that you cannot have, on average, more than 23 students in a class in kindergarten through third grade. And there are actual specific numbers like 17 in kindergarten with not to exceed 23 in the whole grade level. The law is very specific on what they're expecting. We've been able to manage that, but what you're going to end up seeing is without adding additional teachers or having that staff, our concern is that because you're lowering the number of students in K-3 classes, you're actually going to see an increase in fourth grade all the way through 12th based on the way that they allot positions. And so we have no flexibility on this. And so one of the issues that we've seen this year, which has been a really interesting phenomenon, when we as a school system decided in elementary school to move away from a hybrid remote learning situation in the fall to a plan A or full in-person learning, we also had to have dedicated teachers that were teaching virtually. And because of the hold harmless provision in elementary schools, we were able to do that. We were able to say, you're either teaching face-to-face or you're teaching virtual. Without the hold harmless and without the additional ADM allotment we received from the state, I don't know if we would have been able to make that happen. So fast forward to the end of this year, if that continues, and if that requirement continues for a dedicated virtual component, we're going to need to have those positions intact. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of issues meeting that class size requirement. Does that help answer that, Mr. Watson?
It does. And I guess it really is an unfunded mandate at this point.
That is correct.
Right. And if it's not addressed by the governor and the legislature, then it's really going to be a difficult period of time trying to figure out how to make all that work.
Exactly. And I think it's a situation where Union County Public Schools has been a very efficient school system with the amount of funding we've received from the state. And so when you literally, almost don't get an increase from the state on that issue or have an unfunded mandate, our concern is we don't want the quality of education ever to go down in this county. And the manner in which we've been funded at the state level has helped us address all the needs that we have. And if that goes away, we have some serious concerns into the future.
Also, you talk about potential loss of funding due to ADM. How much ADM have you lost in the last couple of years?
Well, so this year specifically, our projected ADM was 41,974, and we're currently sitting at 39,840. So there's been about a 1,600 student swing in what our next year's projections will be. So we were 41,974. We're projected this coming year at 41,411. So that's down about 500 to 600 students from where we're currently funded at, which equates to anywhere from 20 to 25 positions, probably $1.5 million on the state budget.
But a couple of years ago, you were over 42,000, right?
Well, we've been pushing 40, we've been in the 41.5 to 42 range for the last 5 years or so.
And I do want to note that the overwhelming majority of student loss that we've had this year has been kindergarten. That is a national issue, not just a Union County issue. And to all of our, I'll give a quick plug, all of our families considering kindergarten registration, we really want you to come back because we want your kids in our schools. But that has been a significant drop.
Well, and that faith, that goes to what we were just talking about funded allotment. So if we have a bunch of kindergartners that were supposed to come in last year that come with this year's kindergarten class could be even bigger, and we would have issues with that. Or they could skip kindergarten and go right to first grade, and that would add more to, you know what I mean? So it's constantly changing. Yeah.
So if our numbers increase the way that we think they're going to increase, with parents choosing to take a gap year, and just take this year off for kindergarten, if we have an influx of kindergarten and first grade students next year, then that means we're going to have more classrooms based on those class sizes, as you mentioned, and then our fourth grade and fifth grade classrooms, heaven forbid, we could have 30 or 40 students per classroom. That would be worst case scenario. But right now, with the number of students that we feel like did not enroll in kindergarten this year, that's what we're anticipating.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say that y'all have done an outstanding job running two school systems on the budget that you had. Because a lot of people, Chairman Merrill and I spoke to that, how you have the at-homes kids and the in-school kids and splitting that school system in two created even more work. But in this, like we were talking earlier, with some of the money that's being given, maybe contracting or getting contractors to do those online learning positions that will eventually go away, hopefully. And can you not use those extra dollars to contract people to do that job?
So you're basically talking about contracting teachers or hiring someone to do a virtual program, which is extremely expensive. So we're able to do it more cost effectively using our own staff.
So would you be hiring more staff to do that? Okay, so just use your own staff, and they still have to work both ends, because that's one of the complaints I hear from teachers is, trying to juggle both is pretty tough on them.
Well, as Dr. Houlihan mentioned, in elementary school, we were able to try to split that up and dedicate virtual teachers in elementary. When you get into the higher grades, it's much more difficult, and they are having to do both.
Right. So are you asking for more money to do the both ends, or are you going to be able to use those dollars from the federal?
We don't know yet. We don't know if there's going to be a requirement to ensure that remote learning is an option for all students next year. We've already communicated that we do not plan to offer any virtual learning except for our Union County virtual program, which we already have, unless the state requires us to do so.
But if your question is specific about using CARES Act dollars to hire teachers, at this point, they are not eligible for funding through CARES Act.
You had said earlier that you could hire consultants.
We've hired some contract staff. They have given for nurses, psychologists. They've given us some account codes in certain funding sources for nurses, psychologists, social workers, things like that.
It has to fit within the codes that they gave. So the one that was school health support is where we were able to do contracted nurses, but there's nothing that would allow us to do that for teachers.
So Shauna, the ADM for this year projects the budget for next year, correct?
Say that again.
The ADM for this year projects the budget for next year, correct? For the same budget?
They use some statistics, they have a statistician that does some projections to give each school district a projected ADM for the next year. But this year they're projecting us to be down.
Yeah. And is there any correction later in the year to get additional funding from the state?
No, unfortunately, once we get past month 2, the only funding differences that you ever receive from the state due to ADM have to be in increments of 100, either plus or minus. So if in a year like this year, where there may be a lot less students at the beginning of the year, but you see after second semester, maybe those enrollments pick up because things have changed, there's no additional
Yeah.
funding to cover that.
Right.
So if
Thank-
you've been reduced, they don't give it back to you.
Yeah.
And they make the charter school adjustments earlier than that. They make those based on month one. So if you have charter school students that come back, that funding does not follow them.
Yeah. Okay.
Not the state funding.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Can you give me the elevator speech of the ADM? What that entails?
That's your average daily membership. So they, in a 22-day period, they pick a specific day to take the attendance for that day. When you get your funding, the first month and the second month are the two key points that the state will use to project what funding they will either allocate you more or take away from you.
And to be very specific, Reverend Kirkpatrick, is that attendance on that 20th or 40th day, how many students showed up on those days, determines how many teacher positions the state will cover. And I've actually, in my time on the board, I've actually seen times where several years ago, where we actually had to send back money to the state. So, that's why attendance is so important to get the kids into the classroom.
Shawna, could it not be argued with DPI to use some of that money for kindergarten students because, let's say, 1,000, 2,000 was held out countywide? Because of COVID? I mean, if a bunch of their children held their kids out, is that not going to have a direct implication that while these kindergarten classes are huge this coming year?
Well, I believe if they do return and we have enrollment in those grade levels, our funding should reflect that. So we will get the allocations based on that class size if we have a huge increase in kindergarten. But if it doesn't go district wide, you may have changes in that kindergarten class sizes, but it might impact some of your higher grade levels.
But I'm talking about all the children that were held out, because really kindergarten's the only time you can hold your child out of school,
Mhm.
isn't it?
As far as I know, that's the only, you can come in as a first grader.
And that kindergarten population, Mr. Ray, may happen in different pockets around the county. So once we have those 20-day attendance numbers and 40-day attendance numbers, that's when Shawna and Dr. Houlihan's staffs occasionally have had to move teachers from one school to another school based on that data. And I believe you received some emails when we had to move some teachers, but we do it based on enrollment.
So if there's no more questions, we'll go ahead and move on to the local budget outlook. Dr. Houlihan?
So in terms of kind of where we are right now, as I mentioned, we've been in this for the majority of the year, some sort of a hybrid instructional model. We talked on the challenges of staffing of that, so I'm not going to repeat that. We have not seen an overall impact of COVID-19 on the local side because of the issuance of federal dollars. We've talked about the class size law already, so I don't need to go through that. And we've talked a little bit about unfunded state mandates, specifically looking at summer schooling programming and what that will entail. We also are seeing additional impact of charter school payments on UCPS. And so, Ms. McLam, if you kind of want to go through that as well as with the rankings to make sure that we understand the implications of charter school and how we currently rank on a few categories.
Yeah, so in your packets as well, I put slide numbers on here, but I also gave you full page documents because the slides are a bit small. So just wanted to go through a little bit of the impact of the UCPS allocations when it comes to charter schools. So as many of you I think know, any local dollars that we get, there is a per pupil allocation that we process as a payment to charter schools on a monthly basis. So there's a calculation done. We get the charter school projections. I run projections each year. They provide me some of their own projections. If there's a new charter school that opens, I make those calculations at the beginning of each year. Right now, we pay a little over 4,000 students in charter schools, and we are paying approximately 30 charter schools on a monthly basis. Now, the bulk of those it might be 2 or 3, it might be 10, 20. UA is a big one that we pay on a monthly basis. They're in our county, and there's a few others in our county that probably take some of the biggest numbers that we make payments to. When you look at some of the state rankings by category, a lot of what we've talked about in the past is compensation for our staff. The state pulls together statistical data on an annual basis that we submit, and I just wanted to provide some of the rankings where Union County sits. I did highlight Union County as well as I believe I grayed out all the other districts and left unhighlighted the districts that we would consider the Big 12, the largest 12 districts in the state. Right now, Union County ranks 19th in the state for our local supplements. The state average is about $4,900. We're off that average about 10%. When it comes to a per pupil allocation, we rank 29th in the state. Right now, we're at $2,100 per student. The state average is more of like $2,800. Yes. I'm trying to do a lot of these off the top of my head, so sorry. And then when you look at a total per pupil expenditure, when you combine state, local, and federal dollars together, our county ranks 105th out of 115 districts. Now, I would say the reason our total per pupil expenditure ranking is much lower is because we receive a lower percentage of state dollars in comparison to other districts. And a lot of that has to do with demographics. We used to receive low wealth funding many years ago. We quit receiving any kind of low wealth dollars, but our poverty and demographics in the county does play into a lot of the state funding formulas. Right now, for 2020 and 2021, Union County does rank 100 of 100 counties with the highest average median income. I believe Wake County had that for quite some time, but we have now become 100th county in the state with the highest average median income, which plays into a lot of how all of our funding comes through. So I would say our county is a little unique because we do have a varying demographics depending on where you are in our county. So some of the things that we would like to, discuss for consideration, again, charter school enrollment and the changes in that charter school enrollment. Right now, we send about a little over $9 million, almost $10 million to charter schools on an annual basis. So that really comes off the top. The inflationary impact just for operational needs, just the annual inflation of contracts and other services. We do have vacancies in some of our key facility positions. So sometimes we do have to do more contracting for labor. And then any legislated salary increases that are done at the state level, we do across the district. So it's not specific to where a person is paid. If there's a state increase, all employees receive that increase that are eligible. Some of the things we want to target this year for dollars are some of the unfunded categories that we requested last year and some targeted operational and instructional needs. So just for reference, the last time we received a locally funded increase to teacher supplements was in 2017. As I detailed a few minutes ago, we do rank 19th in the state. The request that we had last year was to increase a flat dollar amount for our teacher supplements of $1,000. That would bring our ranking up to 10th in the state as we sit right now. Another category that we have not addressed since 2012 are our school nurses, psychologists, and social workers. With a lot of the COVID needs and the SEL needs that we have currently, this is definitely an area we want to address. The projected annual increase is between $2,500 and $3,000 for these categories of employees. And then the last is our compensation market increase. We had a 3-year market adjustment that we did. We were able to fund the first 2 years, and we have not been able to fund the final year of our compensation request. In that request, it's been since 2017 since we did a local COLA funded for bus drivers and non-certified support staff. I did a graph just so you could see some of the broad categories of year 3 of our compensation adjustment and what has been funded and what has not. A lot of our transportation staff, again, haven't seen any increase since 2017. Some of our school-based support staff, as well as technology and non-school-based support. Does anybody have any questions about any of our local outlook?
With the state formula, should we all advocate for, instead of being ranked 116th, should we all advocate for equal student across the state, that they allot that number per student evenly?
I would say that, in a lot of cases, the funding formulas are very complicated and they get very specific with specific categories of students. So, I mean, in my opinion, I don't know that a straight formula of everyone gets the same is going to.
I guess we're in the top 1/3 in the state when it comes to local dollars invested in education. But the low number that we get on the state's funding is what's causing the problem. So I guess to even, I almost look at it like road funding. I think we're probably on that same list in road funding. We get the lower amount, but we have to invest local dollars. So it's almost like shifting the burden more to the local governments. And I'm sure we're not the only one. So maybe that's something we need to advocate, is that each county, if there's going to be tiers, maybe we shouldn't be 116th, nor should we be number 1. We should be maybe in a tier system that all counties of our size or our situation, that we're number 3 out of 3 or 4 tiers or something. So not that we're looking at our local dollars as, what does the state give out? How much is the state trying to shift the burden to us compared to other counties?
There's been a lot of discussion in the past of revamping a lot of the state funding formulas, because there has been probably over time some of the factors maybe that need to be adjusted or like I say, revamped just to make them more equitable. But I don't know where they are on that. I think they did a study several years ago, and I'm sure they continue to look at more equitable ways to distribute state dollars. But again, that's why I wanted to provide some of the statistical information, just so you can kind of see the comparison and really using the Big 12. Some of those districts are a lot larger than us, and CMS and Wake, but a lot of them really compare to us in size.
Now, also, if I go back and look at the school nurses and psychologists, Michelle, we provided 7 psychologists to supplement the schools?
Not psychologists, we provide social workers and behavioral health care.
Okay, all right.
A different classification.
Okay.
So if there's no more questions, we'll kind of move on to our capital outlook. Continuously needing improvements to a lot of our facilities who are in any aging infrastructure when it comes to technology, of course, is going to always be one of our top priorities. Classroom technology needs, with being in the COVID pandemic, have presented, more and more, because we are doing more remote learning and blended hybrid environments in the classroom. So having the technology working is very important for instruction. Plus, any fleet vehicles, we've not really had a consistent funding source to replace a lot of our aging vehicles. We have a lot of vehicles that are really at high mileage. We try to model what we pull out of our fleet and try to replace based on a lot of the same criteria that you all use. And we have been able to do a few of those vehicles over the past few years, but we continue to need to fund those. So that's really all I have on the capital piece, unless you all have any questions. So I did several graphs that I included just for some discussion points. Just wanted to show some 5-year funding trends with combinations of operational and capital needs. I don't know if anybody has any questions about any of them. I'll go through. I'm probably going to go through them pretty quickly, just to point out. You can see some of the trends on our funding in combination with capital and operations. Wanted to show you some breakdown for all of our state, federal, and local dollars, just to get an idea of how our funding is spent in total. Over 84% of our money is spent in salary and benefits when you combine all of those. So that's a pretty big percentage of what we spend a lot of our dollars on. If you look at them more specifically, state dollars, 94% of state funding is in salary and benefits because we really try to maximize the use of all of our dollars. And a lot of times state funds with positions and other funding mechanisms on the state level, we're able to utilize those to make sure we can fund as much as possible. Again, you can see the breakdown for local budgets. We spend about 64% of our local dollars in salary and benefits, but that sliver right there that's purple is 9%. That's the charter school payment. So almost 10% of our budget does go to charter schools. And then budgeted revenue sources. The bulk of our funding is state and federal, but as you can see, local and other is a pretty big piece of the pie as well. Something that I did want to put together, just because it does come up quite a bit, is just a graphical display of the breakdown of our buildings and or facilities. You can see the percentage of high schools, middle schools, elementary schools all together. Property that we maintain over 1,800 acres. We have over 5 million square footage of buildings. And brick and mortar buildings, we have about 233 buildings that we currently maintain. And again, I did reference in your packets, I put the slide numbers. So if you wanted to reference them in full view for our local supplements, you can see where I've got unhighlighted the Big 12, as well as highlighted where we rank, just again to give you all some comparisons. And then charter school enrollment. Wanted to put on in a graph just so you see it gives you some of the trends in enrollment over the last 10 years. You can see this 2021 year. Of course, we've seen a loss. We've talked about the kindergarten enrollment most likely is where the bulk of that came from. And just a breakdown for you all to see the portion for charter school students versus UCPS students.
Question, please, ma'am. When the state funds you, do they fund you? I'm looking at 2022 here. You got 41,000 plus they've got 4,000. Mm-hmm. So the state funds you for that total, and then you have to allocate.
No, the state funds the districts and the charter schools. Once a charter school is open the first year, they then have their own projections, and they get state dollars before. It doesn't come out of our allotment. Now, if you have a charter school that grows more than 10% over the projections, they will reduce our allocation for that. Now, if you have when you have a charter school that opens in a specific year, the ADM that the district gets does include the enrollment for that charter school because they look at it as a county. I don't know if that answers your question. So they do, once they're open and they have their first year behind them, they get a state allocation and a projection. Only when they don't hit that or exceed the state projection do they come back and impact our allotments.
And the state funding goes directly to the charter schools,
Right.
Unlike the local funding.
Right. The local
Okay.
funding we have to do ourselves.
Okay.
We get, again, rosters on a monthly basis. We verify that the students actually live in Union County. It's a very labor-intensive process because we want to make sure, a lot of these charter schools are not very experienced in record keeping. The bigger one, UA, we don't have, some of the big, but some of these smaller, newer ones that have popped up when they removed the cap on opening charter schools, they were opening up very quickly. And so, a lot of the staff just didn't know how to submit some of this stuff. So we work through that on a regular basis.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's all I have. Oh,
McKibben predicted a few years ago that we'd be down by about 5,000 students in 2025. What's he came back with? I'm sure y'all have had updated projections.
He doesn't see any decrease in enrollment over the next 10 years until the 5th year, and that's down 1%. We had a whole new demographic study, and he presented it at our last board meeting.
So at the March
Oh, that's-
board meeting, I don't know if your staff is familiar with our board docs, but his entire report is available either on our YouTube channel for the March board meeting, and then his 2 documents are attached for copies. But we'd be happy to share those with you.
And I'm going to correct myself. I gave you 9 through 12. Next year, he expects us to go up 2% if we get back our students that left because of the COVID stuff. After that, it's pretty much even across the board. 0.3% up, 0.6% down, and then it goes back up again. So it's all in there if anybody wants copies of it.
So he's looking at an even growth or just a holding steady on the number of students in school.
Pretty much until the 9th year of the 8th year that it starts to go down a little bit more, but not much.
What year is that, Mrs. Hightail? Like 20?
It really, I mean, it really doesn't, I mean, we can make you guys a copy of it. But overall, it's next year 2%, then 0.3% increase, and then it starts to go negative. Negative 0.6%, negative 0.3, negative 0.6, negative 0.4, negative 0.2, negative 0.3, 0%, and then 0.1. And you're talking about like a couple hundreds of students in each of the thing, and then it goes down to like 8 students and 99. But we can get you a copy of his overall.
But
And there's
no explosion in student growth, or it's just kind of staying steady. And there's a reason I'm asking, because some of our issues with water and sewer that we'll be deal with, not being able to provide sewer for a short period of time for a few years. So
There's still areas of pockets of growth. This is just overall throughout the county. So there's still issues with it, Marvin, Cuthbertson, Porter Ridge areas still have issues.
We would be happy to meet with you and go over the McKibben report if you want to. We would love to share that information with you from last month. But I will say we had a very healthy discussion, and Dr. McKibben made a really good presentation that is archived on the YouTube channel. But just let us know, and we'll be happy to sit down and go over that 10-year update with you.
In his report, he does it by school, so you can see each of the individual schools.
And then he gave kind of a summary per cluster. So I thought it was extremely helpful.
And his projections are also based on the current zoning as it is currently with the maximum build out.
Now, your graduation classes on average a year, how many students do you graduate?
3,300, somewhere in
Okay,
there.
all right.
Yeah.
So I assume you've got new pupils coming in to take that place if you're going to be flat. Okay.
let me ask a question along those lines. What are we seeing as far as grade performance this year and graduations? Because I've heard nothing but bad news from and watching as a family with children in school. Are we going to have a bigger senior class next year due to people retaking classes or anything like that? Are we seeing any effect that COVID's had on our graduation rate?
I haven't heard any updates from Dr. Breedlove or his staff, Dr. Houlihan. Have you heard anything or any issues with the class of 2021?
So one of the slides presented earlier with regards to CARES Act funds referred to a line that was dedicated to learning loss. We have seen a direct impact with learning loss and lower performance of children who are at risk compared to prior years because of the amount of catch up that we're trying to do from last spring. In terms of the impact of that having on a graduation rate, we've not had any statistical modeling done to project if that's going to be an issue. At all levels, really, we're working day and night to catch kids up to make sure our kids that are going to be graduating have ample opportunity for credit recovery at the high school level. So we don't forecast that to be a significant issue or change, but we have seen a direct impact of the pandemic on learning loss in general.
We still have some grades that are coming through middle school and high school grades that are bigger than the grades before. So we still have some of that in the middle and high school going through. Elementaries, though, will start to go down in 3 or 4 years. And again, it was a really good discussion with him about what we were doing and
It's worth watching.
yeah, and what happened with the realignment 2 years ago and how that worked out and things like that.
Commissioner Rushing, I suspect probably between April and May, our principals will be letting us know if they're succeeding in doing credit recovery or if there are any students, seniors that are not successfully completing the credit recovery. But I would say it'll be around May before we would have any solid data.
That concludes our portion, I believe, of the agenda, and Mr. Watson and Commissioner Helms will turn it to you.
You do the ad hoc. You do the ad hoc committee.
Yeah, Michelle's going to do that.
Michelle.
I'm going to have a brief update for you on the ad hoc committee for long-range education capital planning. Most of you, I think, will remember, and for the new board members, our board asked for a capital planning committee to be put together of our education partners, UCPS and SPCC, along with some of our own staff, and that group has been working over the last several months. We've had 2 formal committee meetings, and the staff work group has met several more times than the actual committee in terms of the work that we're putting together for that group. There's been a focus on a 10-year look at capital needs with the goal of presenting the Board of County Commissioners with a sustainable financing model to fund the needs of both SPCC and UCPS. We expect to have the final committee meeting in late April, and after you receive your McKibben report, I know that your staff is working to put together their final capital plan, which will really give us the pieces that we need for that final model that we're putting together. And so we'll have that recommendation to provide to the Board of County Commissioners in May. Our plan is to do that prior to the county manager providing his recommended budget in late May. And so the county has provided information to this group regarding our current debt capacity, and the key metrics that bond rating agencies expect to see in AAA bond rated organizations, which we currently are and we would like to maintain. UCPS and SPCC have both presented a list of their 10-year capital needs, an initial list for each organization, and that updated and final list of projects will be provided at the last committee meeting in that model that we're looking at. And I just want to provide our thanks to Mark Strickland, who has been a great partner in the work that we've done. Shauna has provided work. Dave Burnett has also been a valuable asset, and we look forward to providing this final recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and then we would expect to bring it to your group on in the whole as well. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. Mark, I think,
Right.
Mr.
Item number,
Introduce Blake.
Sir?
Can you introduce Blake?
I'm going to do the other one first,
Okay,
item
all
number
right.
7.
so item number 7, pre-funding the design of Forest Hills High School and East Elementary School. Several months ago, county staff and UCPS staff met regarding the state report on facilities that needed to be approved before it was sent up to Raleigh. Those meetings were very informative and very, very helpful. First met with Mark Strickland and Mr. Dave Burnett and the management team. Again, it was very informative. And then there were subsequent meetings with all of those individuals along with members of the Board of County Commissioners. One of the items that for discussion that ensued after those discussions had to do with priority of major capital projects, specifically Forest Hills High School and East Elementary. And in the informal conversation, there was discussion about the timing of construction. If the bond referendum goes forward, if it's approved, what has to happen? What's the time frame? When would be the anticipated completion date, et cetera, so that the construction project ends and the school can open in the next fall semester. And based on that schedule and that discussion, staff looked at, asked the question, what if we pre-funded the design of Forest Hills High School, East Elementary School now, prior to a potential bond referendum in the spring of 2022? How much would that cost, et cetera? The timing of the selecting a designer, going through the design process, lines up nicely with the time frame of a potential bond referendum in the spring and subsequent construction starting thereafter. So much so that it really puts us in a very nice sequential sequence, so that when the project is complete, the school will be ready for the next fall opening of school. So it was a good discussion. Dr. Houlihan, do you have anything to add to that? Because I know you were part of those discussions.
I'll just say thank you for this consideration. Getting a new Forest Hills High School and East Elementary in place in the future is a critical priority for our school district, in addition to other buildings that we have listed in what would have been a bond referendum. Based on the work that our team has done, our design fee on estimate for these two projects in total would be approximately about $4.9 million. Mr. Watts and I have talked, and our board has talked about this being a priority. And I would just say if the Board of County Commissioners would consider that, we would strongly appreciate that consideration and would appreciate any movement on any kind of pre-design work that we can go ahead and get going.
And I would just add this request has the support of the county manager.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that that county staff bring back to the Board of Commissioners at our next meeting, April the 12th, funding options that would allow us to provide funds to the Union County Public Schools for the purpose of design work on the proposed Forest Hills High School and East Elementary projects.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion. Any discussion?
Can I be part of the discussion?
In a minute.
Well, I just have a couple questions.
Let us handle this,
Go
Gary,
ahead.
and then
Go ahead.
all in favor of motion?
Aye.
Okay. Now, sorry, Gary. Go ahead.
That's okay. That's okay. Mr. Watson, this $5 million, I assume this is coming from your, I might not be using the right terminology, but your operating fund balance. Is that correct?
There are a couple of different options that we have to consider to provide the funding.
Okay. One of the things, and I haven't had a chance to talk with any of my colleagues, if we're talking about $5 million, I would also like to enter in the discussion on our part maybe not to the fullest extent, but I would like to look at the option of requesting for the county to fund a one-time bonus to our educators. And as similar has been done to the nurses. So I would like to see that we have that discussion as a board before we request or accept the funding proposal from the county.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Sides, when I moved over to the county commission, assistant manager Brian Matthews, he's about the first week, he said, Mr. Rape, it's a marathon. It's not a 100-yard dash. So I would ask that, although I would like to acquiesce to your request, let's take one thing at a time.
I think that we should be able to talk to that about the board first before we go to the county to have that discussion. But we can.
I agree. I just want to
have
that discussion.
We can have that discussion at finance, correct? I agree.
And I would like to end that discussion by saying thank you for that vote. And because we have been talking to you for 2 or 3 years now about Forest Hills and East Elementary. And I just want to thank you for giving us that consideration to start working on the design.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
It is, before we jump the track, I just really want to acknowledge what you just did for Union County Public Schools. So thank you.
Does the chair consider we need a motion to ask the finance committee and the full board to consider the option instead to request a one-time bonus for whatever, however we decide, amount or staff? Does that require a motion to be considered by the finance and the full committee?
Wouldn't it just be an item for the finance committee to discuss? It wouldn't need a motion. It'd just be an item that we in finance would discuss.
Mrs. Hinetail is the chair of finance, and we hear your plea for that. And I believe there are already some discussions and considerations, a lot of options that I think everyone in this room acknowledges how hard our teachers and administrators have worked through COVID-19. But that is not the purpose of tonight's meeting. And so we will work together as a board to address your recommendation. But I think we definitely need to work together first before we go to the county.
Correct. I agree with that. We can bring that up at finance, no problem. We will talk about all staff at UCPS.
I agree. I just want to see that that's addressed before we accept funding in a different area. And then that, we've obviously seen that it doesn't appear anyway at this certain point in time, state or federal funding is going to do the job. So not having a fund balance ourselves, our only resource is to go to the county. And if it becomes a decision on a program such as advancing funds like this versus bonuses for staff, I want to make sure we have that discussion.
I agree with you, Mr. Size, and I think everyone in this room, including the county, I hope you don't mind if I speak for you, but I think everyone in this room knows what our schools and employees have been through this year. But I just want to address capital funding, and separate. We're having a bond discussion and a capital discussion, and this is something that we've been working on for nearly 3 years with the county, and we are so thankful to have that addressed tonight. And we will go back to our board to discuss our other needs and get back. And I also want to point out that Mrs. Hinetail just mentioned about half an hour ago that the State Board of Education did discuss potential bonuses with funding, and we're just waiting for the thumbs up to be able to use the ESSER dollars or ESSER 2, whatever you want to call it. But The State Board of Education has had that discussion. I think it would be in our best interest to wait to hear from the State Board of Education for our local Board of Education to have a conversation before we, run back to the county to ask for that also.
Mr. Chair, question. How many layoffs did you guys have throughout COVID?
The only employee categories that we moved in that direction was our after-school care program back in the fall. But when we brought students back on Plan A in elementary, we were able to reopen those sites and offer those employees back for rehire. So we have, compared to other school systems, we have not had to move in that direction by any broad sweeping category.
Did we cut hours or for teachers, or
No.
were teachers paid full salary for the year?
Bus
Yes.
drivers' hours have been cut because we've only been in school day for 4 days, so they've been missing their Friday pay.
Right. So teachers have gotten their salaries for the year, regardless of, and again, acknowledging that they have been doing double duty.
And we were held harmless. So even though our ADM, our student enrollment dropped, the state gave us the money based on the 42,000 number instead of the 39,000 number. And what Dr. Houlihan was explaining is that because we had those extra 20 positions, because they held us harmless, was that we were able to use those allotments to create the Plan D Academy. All of the students K through 12 that wanted to be on virtual. So it really helped having those extra positions and not having to cut them because our enrollment dropped. We were able to use those positions to create the virtual academy.
Well, the people that we all work for, I don't have to tell you all, we've seen layoffs in the community. We've seen people lose their businesses and their livelihoods. And, we've seen people have to adjust their livelihoods to COVID. And just, this is, I can tell it's times of uncertainty when we do well in our business, and we've done really well last year. Uncertainty is going to be a thing that's going to be plaguing us for the next year. So this year, if anything, from my standpoint, with the revaluation and what we're going through, we do have to be careful. And I acknowledge, spending $5 million on one thing or another thing, but those schools, like Mr. Minchin said earlier, there are a lot of schools in the part of the county where the Title I money could apply, and definitely the eastern part of Union County would be that location. And we do have to be very careful that we're not committing ourselves to pay that might be seen as something that needs to be ongoing to retain teachers and staff. So, I know that this year, I know how I plan to vote with the revenue neutral rate. And I would just say that I would appreciate it, and I'm sure we would all appreciate it, if you get very creative with the money that's being given by the federal government. I know that we're going to be getting some too, and we need to be creative with that to do all we can to leave as much money in the taxpayers' pocket this year as we can.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Rushing, but I just want to remind you, Shauna McClam did share with us that there are very specific codes that money can be used for, and we cannot get creative and use that money for something else.
Right, I understand.
Just so everybody, we'll take this up at finance. We've talked about it in before, and we're still waiting for DPI to get back to us on. They answered the question at the State Board of Education, but we haven't seen any of it in writing yet. So again, it could be. So our next finance committee is a week from today, right? A week from today at 8 a.m.
Okay, Commissioner Wright.
This is preaching to the choir for some people, but I'll say it again. Having been a teacher for 16 years, if the county or the school system lays employees off, they will draw unemployment, but neither of us pay unemployment benefits. So at the end of the year, the employment commission will bill us for the total amount paid out. So in other words, yeah, they kept them on and got work out of them, because if they had been laid off, they would have done nothing, and the school system would have still had to pay those salaries at the end of the year lump sum.
Okay. Well, next we'll move on to,
Chairman Helm, before you
Yes,
move on, one, I just want to say to you and your board, having two children that graduated from East Elementary, they'll be thrilled to know that progress is being moved towards getting some new facilities, and I will gladly share that with them.
hopefully this will move up the process as much as 2 years. So,
But thank you, Mr. Watson and commissioners. We appreciate it very much.
so next we'll go on to the forecast on tax rate. Blake Hart, if you'll come share that with us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Helms, members of the Board of County Commission, and members of the Board of Education. I apologize. I had seasonal allergies when I woke up this morning. It's impacted my voice, so I'm going to be try and be brief in my comments to spare my voice and your ears. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Let's see. Today we'll be talking about the ad valorem tax rate, the K through 12 education funding relationship, our property valuation process, sales to assessment ratio history, revenue neutral tax rate process, preliminary revenue assumptions, and then we'll end looking at our budget calendar review and the important dates. I want to begin my presentation briefly, as I do most of my presentations to the board, to remind the board and as well as the community that everything that we do in Union County, every dollar that we spend and every initiative that we begin is tied directly and links back to one of our Board of County Commissioners' strategic objectives. We consider these our guiding principles, and we do our very best to make sure that any investment the county makes links back to the principles that the board has set forth. Those are public safety, community consensus, economic development, sustainability, and organizational strengthening. And this year's budget process, as we have done in the past few years, will be guided by our county managers' core values, which are maintaining fiscal discipline, investing in core services, and continuing to build a strategic framework for internal business processes. And with that, I want to first talk about our ad valorem property tax and go over a few important points that I think we probably are all aware of, but it's nonetheless, it's good to review those every so often. The ad valorem property tax is commonly known as the property tax. The tax is charged in proportion to the estimated value of the item being taxed. The taxable items include real property, business, personal property, and motor vehicles. The ad valorem tax makes up 35.2% of total county general fund revenue. It makes up 60.9 or 61% of total ad valorem revenue. 61% of total ad valorem revenue in the county is dedicated to Union County Public Schools, and 28.6% is dedicated to general county government or operations of county services. The property tax is often expressed as the number of cents or penny. You'll hear us talk about a penny value. It's referred to as a penny per $100 of assessed valuation. The annual budget process centers on the property tax rate, which is one of the reasons we're here today. And state statute states that property tax is the primary mandated source of funding that the Board of County Commissioners has to apply to the community to make sure we can take care of all the important services and requirements that we need to provide here in the community. And next, that takes us into our shared responsibility, or where organizations intersect, which is the responsibility for funding K through 12 education. We know that state statute requires school systems to provide a free basic education. The county is required to provide local funding for children's education, along with other community obligations, such as public safety, social services, child protective services, and public health and adult services, just as an example of the other obligations the county has to administer here locally to our great residents. The Board of County Commissioners has the responsibility to use their taxing authority to raise and to allocate limited resources across a spectrum of services. Counties are charged with building, equipping, and maintaining school facilities. The state is charged with funding school operations, current and instructional expenses, and counties must sufficiently supplement state school operations. And again, this is kind of a summary of all of the topics we've been talking about that we're all focused on for the benefit of the students here in the county. And I'd like to say, as the father of four children who are students in Union County Public School Systems, I'm very invested in the success here and very appreciative of the great educational opportunity that you guys provide for my kids and for all the kids here. So thank you. The revaluation cycle is a review of the value of all real property, both land and buildings in the county. It excludes personal property, motor vehicles, and business personal property, which are valued annually through various other processes. The revaluation helps to reflect the current market as required by state statute and to reestablish equity throughout the tax base. It makes values more reflective of current market conditions. And just to add some context, we are part of the Charlotte metropolitan area. As we know, it's Mecklenburg County and counties surrounding it. This region between 2010 and 2019 grew by 17.5%, which makes our region the 10th fastest growing region in the country. Union County, over that period, we grew 19.1%, so just under 2% per year. And as a comparative data point, Raleigh-Cary area grew 29.8 or almost 30% during that time period, which makes them the second fastest metropolitan area in the nation. So we can see that here locally in Union County, we're very fortunate that we are a community of choice. We are a growing community that people come to, and the state as a whole is doing quite well. I will mention when I looked at the list of counties in our region and to look at our growth amounts, our neighbor to the east, Anson County, was one of two counties that actually saw a decrease in population during this time, and they've seen, as we've seen, a 19% growth. They've experienced a 9% decrease in this time period. So just to kind of bring some scale to the topic we're discussing. Many states conduct a revaluation annually. North Carolina requires at least every 8 years. Our most recent prior revaluation was in calendar year 2015, applicable to the fiscal year of FY 2016. The state also requires a revaluation when the sales to assessment ratio is greater than 115% or less than 85%. And I have a chart on the next slide that will talk about that in a little more detail. The current revaluation in 2020 was triggered by a sales to assessment ratio in 2018 of 84.5%. So just barely came under that threshold in 2018, and that triggered the revaluation that's happening now. And the last bullet point identifies that ratio continued to decrease or decline from 2018 from about 85% to where it is now in 70%. So that's a sign of growth in the community. So this is a chart that shows the history of the sales to assessment ratio in Union County over, I believe, back to 2004. The red line that goes horizontally represents 100%. So, and the blue line represents the actual sales to assessment ratio. If the closer we are to the red line means that the assessed valuation of a property is exactly in line with what the market at that time will bear. So if the data points that are close to the line usually represent revaluation years, because the revaluation we know is an opportunity to reset the values and try and bring parity back to both the county and property owners. So you'll see all the way to the left on the x-axis, the first green number there is 97.53. That was a revaluation year in 2004. And you'll see that in 2 to 3 to 4 years after that, the line gets decreases. And what that means is that the general property in the county is increasing. And so the assessment ratio is decreasing. And you'll see there was another revaluation in 2007 that number jumped up to about 96%. Again, close to the red line to try and bring some parity in the relationship between the county and taxpayers. Then you'll see also when the blue line crosses the red line in 2009, and if you remember, that was the entry point of the beginning of the Great Recession that we all lived through and have learned important lessons from. But you'll see there was the line inverse at that point and increased up to 119%. And at that point, again, we crossed the threshold on the upper limit of 115%. And the state said, hey, things are out of whack. We need to revalue the property at this time and bring it back down to find parity. then you'll see in 2016, the prior revaluation, since then, the blue line has trended downward at an increasing rate to where we are now at 70%. And what that represents is that at a 70% ratio means that the home tax assessment, that your home would be assessed at $70,000, but the current market would bear a sales price of about $100,000. So there's an inequity there that'll be reestablished during the property revaluation. And that's the purpose there. So once we finish the revaluation, once the tax office goes through that process, and a lot of work and intellect goes into that from our great tax office, then it's our responsibility to calculate the revenue neutral tax rate. And the steps as laid out by general statute are, the first thing we do is establish the assessed valuation or tax levy for the current fiscal year, so FY21. Then we will use that information to calculate the new tax rate that would yield the same amount of revenue or tax levy as the prior year based on the new tax base. Then we'll take that, and the state allows us to calculate an average growth factor over the prior number of years since the most recent revaluation, and then you apply that to the tax rate, and that gives you your final revenue neutral tax rate. So those are the steps that are involved in calculating that, and we're going through that process now, and we will be revealing that or be sharing that with our board here at a future date. I want to point out too that there's an inverse relationship between the tax base and tax rate. As the tax base grows, the revenue neutral tax rate will decrease. And of course, the opposite is true also, which if you think back to the chart that I showed, when the blue line goes above the red line, well, then there's an inverse relationship there too, because that means that the overall value in the community is decreasing. And so there may need to be an increase to the tax rate to offset that. Fortunately, we're not in that situation currently. The revenue neutral tax rate will not equal the same amount of revenue to the county or the same amount on the tax bill to the taxpayer. We know that when a revaluation is conducted, it's not a general increase of every piece of property at the same rate. It's a statistical distribution of many data points across that following a bell curve. And so we know that my house may increase 10%, while someone else's house value may increase by 50% or 40%. And so, of course, if you apply the same tax rate to those two properties, the amount of increase or growth in tax obligation would change accordingly as well. The revenue neutral tax rate is applied to the entire county. An individual tax bill impact is based on a unique assessed valuation change. The revenue neutral calculation balance impact to ensure taxpayers are protected from significantly higher bills, and the relationship between the county and the property owner grows more imbalanced over time. Like that was illustrated in the chart there. With each year, the blue line got lower and lower and lower, or back during the recession, it got higher and higher and higher. And so the revaluation is an opportunity, or really an obligation that the state gives us to make sure that we bring parity to that equation every so often. And with that, I want to share some of the preliminary revenue assumptions that we're using to project or plan for the FY22 budget. The ad valorem tax base, which of course is what we're talking about today, I'm using a 3% base growth on that, and that will continue to be refined once we have the final revaluation results and we're able to go through those calculations to really refine that number, and then we'll use that to calculate the revenue neutral tax rate. I will say that that when we built the FY21 budget, we used a 3.2% growth rate in the tax valuation, and that was equal to what we had seen the 2 years prior as far as actual tax base, and then before that we saw about a 3.6 in 1 year and a 3.4 the year before. So as we refine as we establish, going back to point number 1 on my previous slide, as we establish what the tax rate actually is for FY21, then we'll use that to tighten up that calculation and use that to grow for FY22. As far as our local sales tax base, I have a base amount of 7% for growth in 22, And I know our members of our board and the county manager have heard me share this several times, but I want to share it with everyone to make sure that we understand what's happening. And when we were planning for pardon me, excuse me. This time last year, when we were preparing for the FY21 budget, you'll remember we were just at the beginning of the pandemic response. And so one of the instruction that we had from our county manager, which was a very sound direction, was let's be conservative in our revenue estimates, and especially in those revenue sources that are most elastic or have the tendency to change based on economic conditions. And the one that is most elastic for us is our sales tax. We budgeted a decrease in sales tax of a negative 4.5% on the assumption that because of the pandemic, because of the pending economic downturn, because of all the things that were going to happen, at that point, we needed to be conservative in our estimate of sales tax. What we've actually seen or we've experienced to date, and to date we have 6 months of data of our sales tax revenue. There's a 3-month lag from the time that you spend $1 until you get it back as revenue in the county. So we have 6 months worth of data now, and we hope to have our 7th month here in a few weeks to be able to use to further refine our estimate. But using a 7% growth rate to begin is a little bit higher than what we would normally use at this point in the year. Our average growth in sales tax is about 6%, sometimes down to 5%, and sometimes a little bit higher. But in using 7%, we'll have a discussion about bumping that up, because to date we're about 15%. Our collection is about 15% above our prior year actuals, and so where we budgeted to have a decrease of 4.5% of sales tax, we're actually seeing a 15% increase over the budgeted amount. Now that budgeted amount was discounted intentionally in the event that the economy, had some significant long-term problems, and there are some significant issues in the economy. But locally and statewide, we've been fortunate that through the stimulus injections of stimulus money, and also the different pockets of local economies that were affected more than others, and we've been fortunate that we haven't been severely impacted like some of the more coastal counties or travel destinations have been. But we're seeing an increase in sales tax, so we're going to look at that and refine it, and hopefully see if we can increase that a little bit to get to a more reasonable number for FY22. Our non-county taxes, which are charges for which are revenue that we receive from federal and state, and also some charges for services, have a conservative growth estimate of 1.3%. To be conservative, and again, we'll further refine those as we go through the next month or 6 weeks while the manager develops his proposed budget. And a reminder also that in FY21, the entire county budget, the entire county general fund budget, only increased by 1%. So as we held things back in expecting a downturn in our revenues, we held things back to a 1% growth overall. And so going into next year, we'll need to reassess that. As I go through and think about planning for the next year's budget and what revenues might be and what to expect, I take a look at certain economic indicators, both national and local, and I want to share some of those with you here that to me and to a lot of concerned folks pose positive outlook for the economy, both local, statewide, and national. And those are the Federal Reserve Board projects GDP growth in 2021 of 4.2%. That's compared to a contraction in 2020 of a negative 2.4%. The unemployment rate currently is nationally about 6.3%. Statewide is about the same, and here in the county we're about 5%, which fortunately we tend to be to fare better than the state and national indicators across the board. That's compared to in the height of the pandemic and back in March, April, and May, the national unemployment rate was up to 14.3%. And so we've cut those in half, which is a great sign. Also, the continued unemployment claims in North Carolina are currently about 66,000 as of February, and that's compared to a high in May of last year of almost 620,000. So, those two data points are very interrelated, and fortunately, we're seeing both of those are coming down, which makes sense. But folks are getting back to work. We're not quite there yet, but we're making progress in getting folks back into the workforce and back where they want to be. Also, the Dow Jones today closed at almost 33,000. That's compared to 18,600, which was the lowest point of the drop in March of last year. Mortgage rates are at historic lows of 2.375 for a 30-year fixed rate. We just in the past few weeks, the county is beginning the overdue rental assistance program, and as we know, the third round of federal stimulus payments are being deposited now, and so those are significant injections of cash into Union County, North Carolina, and the nation. And as those funds filter through the economy, that should help our sales tax going forward and should continue to bolster some of these economic indicators, which fares positively for what we're doing here today. And again, I mentioned that the current sales tax receipts are about 15% above prior year. Now, if the next 6 months worth of data drops significantly, and instead of being 15% up, we're 20% down, well, then that means we're going to end the year at lower than we expected. I don't think that's going to happen, but we still have 6 months to go. And if we come in lower and lower and lower, or kind of even out about 10%, then we'll be in a positive situation for the end of the year. Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question about that. Now, when counties, when people, a vendor report sales tax, they separate about counties and where they made that money. And I would make the assumption that online sales would do the same thing. So would that more accurately reflect how people are spending the money, where the tax dollars are coming from? For example, in Union County, if you buy something from Amazon or eBay or Walmart and get it online and shipped to your home, those dollars are going to be reflected to Union County, not to Walmart in another state or another county, correct?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's only, I think, in the past 2 years that the decision was made to collect sales tax from online purchases. So that definitely is feeding into that growth as well. Yeah, great point. Let's see. And then the last point is, we talked about the economic indicators, but if we just think about life in general and what we've all been focused on for the past year, vaccines are widely available now, and estimates are that anyone who would like to be vaccinated will have that opportunity, I believe, by the end of May. And then COVID infection rates are trending down. Hopefully, we're approaching herd immunity, and we can all return to normalcy. I know I'm very happy that the decision was made to bring the kids back to school 5 days a week. I certainly appreciated that. So as we approach normalcy, my hope is that we can approach normalcy economically and budgetarily as well, which will benefit everybody involved. Then I wanted to end with our budget process calendar and just give you an idea of our process. If you look at the top, we began the budget process on the county side back in mid-November, reaching out to the community partners in the county that perform very important work that we as a county are not positioned to do or poised to do, and work in areas of need throughout the county. And so we began the request process with them at that time. We've gone through our departments creating their budget requests. They've submitted those, and those have been prepared and shared with the county manager and his team to begin reviewing those requests and getting an idea of what that total amount looks like. We've had several budget workshops and work sessions with our board to share with them the status of the budget process and talk about some of the revenue sources that I mentioned. And we're working with our local volunteer fire departments to consider their budget requests also. And of course, we have this important meeting tonight that we're enjoying. And we have a few more budget work sessions scheduled over the next few months, working towards and in preparation of the manager presenting his proposed budget to the board on 5/31, and with an optimistic date of a budget adoption on 6/14. Now, those dates are subject to change, of course, based on timing and based on important matters that may come up. But that's a best case scenario. I'll say that. And that's all that I have, and I'll be happy to answer any questions or.
I have a question.
Sure.
So just in looking over the calendar, it looks like we give you our formal budget request, but there are no work sessions on the calendar between that time and the manager's proposed budget.
Put your button on.
Yeah, that's fine. Can you not hear me? There you go. Oh, sorry, I wasn't close enough. So what I noticed was on the calendar update, you receive a request on 5/15. The manager's proposed budget is on 5/31. I don't see any work sessions between those two dates. Is there communication happening before the formal budget request comes out? So we're having this meeting, but we're obviously not sharing any numbers on our needs. We're more sharing bullets on our needs. Just curious if, like, how that's factored in the formal budget request in a 2-week turnaround.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a tight window, and I will say that that's the date that the state requires that you submit your request. We're happy to take it anytime before that to give us more time to consider it and plan for it. But the dates are flexible, so if we need to add a work session to discuss that or have further commentary on that, we can definitely do that. And if we need to push back the adoption, the recommended or the proposed dates, we can do that too, to make sure there is time to fully consider that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, you mean like another joint meeting, right, to discuss a budget, or do you just mean the time?
No, there's a couple of Board of County Commissioner work sessions.
Right, but it's
And-
before our budget, yeah.
Right.
Okay,
So I'm just wondering how ours factors in. Like, is it already,
right.
is the number already kind of earmarked before our formal request
Right.
even comes in?
I understand that. I would like to have a discussion with the county commissioners about our budget at some point too, as well. That would be great.
Joe, this year, there has been extraordinary communication between the two staffs. I believe they talk every 2 weeks. And, it's worked great. And I think in answer to your question, we don't mind getting together with you again, but I think it's working better for them to work together. And then maybe present it to y'all and then y'all present it to us. But I'm not setting how it should go.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was hoping was happening, right? So we're meeting very frequently, a lot of collaboration. And what I want to make sure is, like, the first time you see our request is not the formal request, right? And there's not enough time to turn that around. So as long as that back and forth is happening and.
Well, from what I understand, it is Manager Watson. Will you address that as far as communication?
We've had, I think, 3 meetings so far over the last month and a half. Plan to continue those every other week. If I'm not mistaken, we probably have one scheduled. It's either this week or coming up. And we're going to continue those. When we get closer and there is we received the budget request, certainly if Dr. Houlihan and I, in our discussions, believe we need to come back and have some larger discussions with the board, we'll be glad to schedule an additional meeting. So there's flexibility there.
Thank you.
And I can tell you from the board, if chairman wants to get together with several of the board and have discussion or explanation of several items, we will welcome that opportunity.
Thank you. And I would also say that between your 2 work sessions, if you need our liaisons or would like to have our liaisons there just in case to answer questions, that's possible too.
Thank you.
That we could, use your work sessions to help answer your questions as they happen. We could have someone there. That's an idea also.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. It may be here in mid-March, it might be a little early, but I'm wondering if after the end of the 3rd quarter, you might be able to provide our finance department with an indication of what we might look at or hope to look at for true-up funding. I note that all your projections are being exceeded, which is good news. That's better than going the other way. So I'm wondering if there is, at what point, besides, prior to the fiscal year being over with, you might be able to project that number.
I'm going to defer to the county manager on that.
We're actually, and we've had these discussions with the superintendent in working through how we develop our budget. We're going away from a dedicated tax rate for the Union County Public Schools. We want to budget based on your needs. We are not anticipating any true up funding mechanism in the future. We've already provided the true up funding early for this year, but that will not be part of the process going forward.
So are you talking about for the next fiscal year?
That's correct.
So you're going to project or allot a dollar figure versus a cent figure. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct.
What in that case, what would you do if your revenue projections exceed what you had allotted at the beginning of your budget? Would that just drop to your fund balance?
It goes to unassigned fund balance. And if that were to occur, just like in the case of this year, and we are having discussions about that, there may be the opportunity for additional one-time funding requests, but we're in the middle of having those discussions right now.
At what point before the end of this fiscal year do you think you will have a better picture of what that might look like?
For the entire fiscal year?
Well, prior to the fiscal year, how can you project what it's going to look like?
Well, we know what our current we know what our current unassigned fund balance is right now, and how much it has been growing.
Okay.
In addition, by the addition of the overage of sales tax, so we know what that number is, and what we've been watching is the trend of that number, which is very important. We really didn't know going into the COVID experience what that was going to look like. I think it has changed consumer spending habits. I think that's evident by the trends that we have seen. It's been very interesting to watch that take place. That seems to be a sustained trend at this time. It'll be very interesting what we see next week when we get our next month's sales tax revenue in. But at this point, we have exceeded our projection thus far in the fiscal year. And again, those are conversations that Superintendent and I and our finance staff have been having regarding one-time expenditures.
Madam Chairman, I think that completes our portion.
Hey, thank you very much. Okay, so thank you, Blake. That was a really good presentation. So that brings us to the budget process schedule. You have provided that here for us, and we have those dates. And we will make ourselves available to work around your work sessions. I think that will be a good plan. Are there any closing comments from the Board of Education? Any closing comments?
Just a quick point, Madam Chair, and that is these types of gatherings where you have our blessed county leaders come to us and we come to them, and we're meeting today. Just want to know that before we conclude, when you leave here today, have you received information that will cause you to look upon your school board and say, we're moving in a good direction, and, are you make it more prone for you to see our concerns, because the last thing we need is to have this type of gathering and, you walk away and it's like, well, what was that all about? We want to make sure that you have gotten everything you want from us and staff while we're here, so that when you get together with yourselves and collaborate, you'll be doing it from a point of strength, because you've received all the data and information and had a chance to read us, in this particular case on home ground, so that you'll know what your school board is doing. I'm very concerned that these things are fruitful. And so if there's any questions you may have for us or staff, it would be great to hear those now, so that when you leave here, you'll be confident in your school board.
Thank you, Jimmy. As Board of Commissioners have any comments they'd like to make in closing? Commissioner Rushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Jimmy, in the vein of what you're saying, it's nice to sit here like brothers and sisters sitting around a table discussing challenges that we face, versus in years past. And I go back a long time on, dealing with this board and dealing with school boards instead of enemies, trying to create new challenges. I think that what we've heard tonight from you and what you've heard tonight from us, it goes a long ways. And I just appreciate the opportunity again to be able to work with you. And I have probably more discussions with Chairman Merrill than anybody else. But if there's anything that you have to ask from us, we are in challenging times, and hopefully we'll get through this together. And I believe we're all working for the people of Union County to do that. Thank you.
As a new commissioner, I can definitely say that this has been fruitful for me. And as a new commissioner, I try to listen more and speak less. I feel like that's a pretty good posture to adopt at this point in my public service. I can tell you this, I've learned a lot. One thing I've learned that has truly put me back on my heels, so to speak, is just how little Union County gets in terms of state per pupil expenditure. I'm truly blown back on my heels. If I read that right, out of all city and all county public systems, Union County gets the least amount of state dollars per pupil. I certainly hope and expect the county can help out, and I concur with Commissioner Rushing and others who have commented that the school system has done, I think, quite an admirable job in navigating some challenges this year. Perhaps that's the understatement. But speaking for myself, I'm motivated to be much more of an advocate in terms of reaching out to our General Assembly delegation and General Assembly leadership. I'm truly almost speechless over what I've learned in terms of state dollars. And again, I hope to be an advocate for our students. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
All right, I'd like to thank UCPS for hosting this, giving us an opportunity to communicate. I think the transparency is probably the best it's been. And like I said, Ms. Merrill, we'd welcome the opportunity to meet with commissioners and discuss anything that you feel is necessary. But I want to thank our staff for bringing the information, your staff for bringing what they brought as well. So, and I appreciate it. And with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn our special session. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will accept the motion from our board to
Motion to
adjourn.
adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.